Welcome to my gardening live. I am coming to you from the most beautiful, idyllic backyard of my friend Roxine Brown, who is an incredible landscape designer, and her company is called Harmonia Inc., perfectly aptly named. And here we are amidst the beautiful white pine forest of East Hampton. There's a beautiful koi pond behind me. You can hear the water gurgling. You can see the bamboo grove, some soothing blue hydrangea all around us, the Japanese maples, the lavender rhododendron. I mean, it's just the most idyllic property here. And she's got this 25-foot tall weeping beech tree, which provides the most restful green wall between the front of her property and the back. So we're here today, okay, to talk about fall, right? We're in the fall. We're in the thick of fall. It's chilly, it's beautiful, and how do you get ready for winter? What does that look like for your gardening purposes? I am not a green thumb, but Roxine is. So I want to introduce you to Roxine Brown. She is the expert, and we're going to follow along with her today and learn some things about nature. Welcome, Roxine.
Hi, thank you, Christina.
Thank you for inviting us to your beautiful, beautiful, beautiful home. It's really lush and lovely. I mean, really so green, so spectacular, and peaceful here.
Yeah,
I feel like a very meditative moment. I think we should do a meditation session here
I totally agree.
with Donna when she comes out
Yeah.
next. So let's talk a little bit about how to protect your plants. What does that look like for you?
So, most people recognize that gardens are cut down in the fall. So basically perennial gardens need to be trimmed back. Everything needs to be sort of what we call put to bed in preparation for the winter season and also in thoughtfulness for the upcoming spring season. So putting the plants to bed for us, what that means is giving one last good fertilizer to those plants so that they have the opportunity to really soak in some good nutrition and to come out even stronger the next year. So fertilization is an important thing. It's also important to not fertilize too late in the season. So many people don't realize that, but you shouldn't really fertilize beyond August, September, because you don't necessarily want to promote growth of plants when they are coming into their colder season, and they could actually be nipped by some of the cold weather and do some damage. So fertilization is important, but it needs to be done at the appropriate time. So that's early fall. And then at that point, we mulch the ground. Now there's a lot of controversy about to mulch or not to mulch twice a year. We're huge proponents of mulching twice a year. We tell every one of our clients that if they hire us to do the maintenance on their property, that we're going to mulch in the fall, because that's the time when you really want to protect the root systems of the plants. So
Why is that important to protect the root systems?
well, the root system is really its livelihood. That's really, when it doesn't have a strong root system, the plant is ultimately going to suffer and ultimately will die.
So to create that longevity, to give a plant's life an extension in the best possible existence, you want to protect its roots.
You want to protect its roots.
And the mulching does that.
And mulching does that. And mulching also adds to the nutritional factor of soil.
Ah,
So
how so?
because when the mulch breaks down, it's filled with nutrients. It's partially compost material. So it adds to all of that beautiful soil, that humus and that beautiful soil that will benefit the plant long term.
So when we talk about fertilizer, there's so many different kinds, and there are lots of chemicals that people use. One in particular called Roundup. We all know what that does. Glyphosate is so toxic. What do you employ? What do you utilize and to protect your plants in the healthiest way possible?
So all of our fertilizers that we use are organic. Simple fertilizers that you can purchase just about anywhere. Polytone is for acidic plants, and it is an organic fertilizer. So you use it on rhododendrons, on pines, on evergreens. You can even use it on a hydrangea to get the bloom to turn blue, as opposed to pink. Plant tone is a fertilizer that's used on perennials. It's not acidic. So it is the kind of fertilizer that it's organic as well. It's polytone, plant tone, and rose tone are the three that are all made by the same company. They're all organic. They're not really a time release, but they act slowly as they break down in the soil. So that's really the three that we use the most. And then when we want to give roses some extra protection in the winter, what we'll do is we'll get some really beautiful compost, and we'll cover the roots with compost because roses like to have compost on their roots as opposed to mulch.
So another form of protecting these trees, these plants, these bushes is this notion of wrapping them. You go into people's yards in the winter and you just see this gauzy sort of, they're enveloping these plants. Tell me a little bit about why that's important to do for protective purposes.
So there's two reasons that you wrap. One is for deer protection, and the other is for protection of the harsh winds in the wintertime. For deer protection, you have to consider the height of the protection that you're putting on the plant. So oftentimes when we go into a property, if a particular garden needs both, or a particular plant needs both deer protection as well as protection from the winds, we'll build a burlap wall. Oh. And we'll build it to at least 5 feet or taller, depending on how big the plant is and how much of it needs to be protected. So the burlap is actually a wind protectant, but it can also suffice as a deer fence or a deer protection guard. If the plant doesn't require the wind protection, and not all plants do, boxwoods do, some types of evergreen screening will need winter protection from the winds. But if it's a particular item that you just, like a rhododendron, that all you really want to do is protect its leaves from the deer over the winter, because even deer-resistant material will get eaten in the winter by the deer, then you can just use a short little deer fence. You can put a 4-foot pool compliance fence up to just protect it so the deer can't get in.
So what are the plants with fall interest?
So it's really great to be able to take your garden into the fall and enjoy some color, because everybody, you get through the summer and it's a little dreary. The sun starts setting earlier. It's, gets dark sooner. It starts to get cold, and there really isn't a lot of excitement. There's a few plants that really do provide really great excitement. One is called calicarpa. And it's actually, we have it on our property. It's a beautiful, very natural looking plant that grows to about 4 to 5 feet. And at this time of year, it begins to get a violet colored berry. It's the most unique color.
What's it called?
Calicarpa.
Calicarpa.
Yeah, it's not widely used, but it's a great plant. And its stature is about 4 feet by 4 feet. So it's a nice full shrub. So that's one. Another one that I love to use, and not a lot of people use it, is camellia.
Camellia.
Camellias are not very, you don't see that many of them. They do need to be put in a very special location on a property because they don't like the easterly winds. So they need to be protected by a structure, but if you put them in, they have very different bloom times depending on the variety. Some of them will bloom as early as October. Some of them will bloom in November. Some of them will bloom in December. Some of them will bloom all the way out into February, March. And they're a very special plant with a very glossy leaf. It's an evergreen versus the calicarpa is not. It'll lose its leaves. So you'll get fall interest, but you won't get winter interest. With camellia, you will get winter interest.
And what time of year do you plant those?
You can plant them now. You can plant them in the fall. You don't want to plant them much later than October. You would then plant them probably again after that in the spring. So
And what zone? Where do you plant those? Gucci and Gorgeous is asking.
Gorgeous is asking?
So that's her handle.
I love it.
Gucci and Gorgeous.
I love it.
So we're talking about the Northeast?
Northeast.
4 seasons. A
Yes.
climate with 4 seasons.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and Carol is asking, Carol get it right, is asking, is this a good time to prune, cut back all the growth?
Depends on the plant. So you don't want to plant a buddleia, butterfly bush. You don't want to prune vitex. You don't want to really hard prune your evergreens either. But you can prune all of the perennials. You can prune your hydrangeas. You can prune the deciduous, the leaf dropping type of plants. But you don't really want to hard prune the evergreens and some of the bigger, really strong flowering shrubs in the summertime. Yeah.
So are some of those fall interest plants good for home decor, some of the branches of those plants?
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about gathering branches for the home. That's
Okay.
a beautiful sort of decorative element.
Yeah. So there are some really beautiful winter type of plants that are really not just winter plants, but that you can go out and find often in the winter that have a very different character to them. For instance, pine branches are great and they're easy to find, and that can make beautiful boughs over the holiday time period. Hollies, when they develop their red berries, you can prune branches of the hollies and bring those in. There's also a plant called winterberry that is a shrub that will drop its leaves. You may have seen it in some of the florists, but it has a beautiful thin branch and the whole thing is covered with red berries. So that's another one, and it's native to here, and you can find it if you were going on a hike, and you might, be watching for something like that, even if you don't grow it particularly at home. So.
Which leads me to my next question about hiking during the fall into winter. What are some of the best ways in which to find trails, nature trails, and can one sort of collect those branches and berries along the way?
Yeah. So it's easy to, you can get your hands on the local trails very easily by Googling. It'll give you a full map of the area of the different trails that are accessible and what they offer. They're probably one of my favorite trails that I go to, which is not necessarily one for gathering branches, but is Elizabeth Morton, because I love the wildlife at Elizabeth Morton.
So Elizabeth Morton Wildlife
is over on Noyak Road.
Is in the Hamptons,
Yes.
Between Southampton and Sag Harbor on Noyak Road.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a beautiful nature walk.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Takes you all the way to the beach.
It takes you all the way to the bay. You can actually feed the birds out of your hand. They're so tame. They're so used to people coming with the food to feed them that the little chickadees will fly right into your hand and feed out of your hand. It doesn't necessarily have as much for collecting branches. I would say that more of the trails that are in the woods, you're going to find more branches for collecting. Cedar branching you could find, pine branching you could find, winterberry you could find. You might even find some of the vines that carry berries in the wintertime that would be beautiful. Yeah.
Wanda is asking, if you live in the South and it stays warm past October, when should we cover our plants?
You don't want to cover it until it gets cold, and you want to probably be at about 40 degrees or below before you cover your plants. Even here, we do not winter wrap our plants until December. Because if you get a warm snap, which we all know that our weather has been so volatile and it's up and it's down, and we know why, but it can be very detrimental because the plant underneath will get burned from the heat being collected under the burlap. So you want to wait till you get to about a consistent 40 degrees.
And planting bulbs in the fall, okay, for early spring colors, what are the bulbs that you like to plant at this time of year so that they bloom in the spring?
So I think a lot of it depends upon if you are in a situation where you have deer. If you need a deer-resistant bulb, daffodil is tried and true. They don't eat daffodils. And if you were to get your hands on a bulb catalog, you'd be blown away by how many hundreds of different types of daffodils there are today, with double and triple flowers, every color imaginable, salmon, pink, yellow. It's not just yellow and white anymore. You can get all kinds of beautiful colors in daffodils.
So that daffodil picture that I posted on my Instagram stories is so beautiful, that row of daffodils, and it just is such a nice incentive to viewers to plant those beautiful daffodils now, because in the spring, that's when they bloom, and that's when they look so incredible. Yeah, that is such a great picture.
And that picture is one where that particular client has a beautiful cherry tree allayed when you enter her property. And that blast of beautiful daffodils in the spring is something that every time she comes out to, she loves.
What's an allay?
It's a
like
row.
alley?
Like an
spelled
I guess
the same way?
No, it's spelled A-L-L-E-E.
Oh, okay.
But it's basically French for an alley.
Okay.
So you're driving through a double set of cherry trees when you're winding through the driveway.
Love that, the allay.
Yeah. So daffodils are great. And another one is a hyacinth.
And the deer don't like the daffodils,
they do
as
not
you
like
said,
daffodils.
which is a great flower to plant, because there's so many deer out here on the East End, and they eat everything.
They eat nearly everything.
And because we've had a few brutal winters, they're really struggling for food, to find food, so they've gone out of their comfort zone, and they eat everything.
Yes.
So nothing is sacred, nothing is safe from the deer in the winter. Except the daffodils.
Long ago, we planted tulips at our property here, and this was really before I recognized that tulips were never going to be deer resistant. And we weren't living here full time at the time. And I was in a different vocation. And lo and behold, the tulips came up, and they hadn't popped yet, but they came up, and we were leaving on Sunday, and when we came back on Friday, every tulip was gone.
Do deer like, Andrea's asking, do deer like lavender?
They do not like lavender. Deer do not like things that are herbaceous. So lavender is considered an herbaceous plant. Catnip is considered an herbaceous plant. Russian sage is considered that. So anything that has, but don't get it confused with roses, because even though they're scented and they don't like the other scents, they love rose scents because it's not herbaceous. So that's really the dividing line between the scents.
So Roxine, you know so much about every flowering plant, every plant, what's indigenous to the area, what to plant right now in the fall so that it blooms in the spring. What are some of your favorites?
Plants?
Plants and flowers. And why?
I have so many. Let's see. Okay. So I mentioned one already. I love camellia. I think if I could have an entire bank of camellia, I would love it. But it would never work because it wouldn't be in a protected spot. So I put them in very special places. I adore Japanese maples. That's one of my very favorite trees. There's just something that's so peaceful and beautiful. And we have many on our property. We have an upright maple here. There's a small red maple on the far side of the pond. This is a weeping, the Stygiet maple, the green one right here, which you wouldn't even necessarily realize that.
It's so tiny.
It's so tiny. Then there's another red maple here, and then up at the pool we have more. And in the front of our house you enter and we have 2 Japanese maples. So for me, I love the feeling of a Japanese maple, and I love the structure of a Japanese maple. I think that's such an interesting structure when it loses its leaves.
Can we just look at your koi for a second? They're huge, okay, and they're so beautiful. How many do you have? How old are they? Is there any special secret to, I know I'm segueing out of plants and into...
That's all right, we're right here.
Fish. but they really are special.
Unfortunately, you're not seeing them to the greatest benefit right now because we had a little problem with the pond, so it's not as clear as it normally is, but you can still make them out. Most of our koi are 25, 35 years old probably in total. I mean, we didn't get them all as babies. I'm talking to my husband over here. He's really the koi keeper. 20 years old.
Right.
Okay. Most of them we've had for 20 years, many of them. And some of them were only 4 or 5 inches long, and now they're probably 16 inches. We had one set born in here. So they actually we had a little spawning area, and one was born.
Yeah, what are the strings across the pond for?
So the strings are into our property. They can circle for a very very high distance and still know that there's a koi pond down here. And a few times we've woken up and the heron were hanging over, ready to grab fish. So we actually, this fishing wire keeps all the birds out, and it keeps the raccoons from getting to the fish. And it's relatively invisible, which is nice, but it really protects them.
What a great idea. Have you named these koi?
We have not. No, we have not.
Come on, the 25-year-old,
Yeah.
30-year-old one?
Yeah, and you're not seeing one of my favorite
Is
one.
that one, the biggest one there? Is that the oldest one?
That's probably the oldest one. There's many different kinds of koi in here, but there's a particular koi that we probably have 3 or 4 of called the butterfly. And if you could see it close enough, you see that it has wings.
What is this
beautiful
grass that you lined your koi pond with?
So that's a carex. That's a carex grass. So that bright green is a carex grass, and then when you go further over and you see the variegated one beyond the Japanese maple, that's also a different kind of carex.
Is it evergreen?
It is evergreen.
Oh, so this will look
It is
this way all
evergreen.
winter.
Yes.
And what about the fern over there? I see some beautiful fern.
Yeah, those
Is that
are
indigenous to your land?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But those are not, they will die back this season and then they'll come back again. But, this was really developed to have a very Japanese kind of meditative spirit to it. This big tree here is a weeping dogwood. You don't see many weeping dogwoods either. You see a lot of upright dogwoods, but this is a weeper. And so it has been in now for about 3 years, and it's about ready to consume the pond.
So I wanted to ask you, before we talk about meditation spaces and how to create them, a lot of people, are concerned about ticks. And one would think now that summer's behind us and the cooler climate is setting in, that there just aren't going to be that many ticks. But that's a myth, because they're still active and quite dominant this time of year on all forms of creatures of the wild, the deer, the rodents, everywhere. And they, some of the treatments that you mentioned earlier, like what are some of the preventative measures that you take to perhaps modify or lessen to a degree the sort of amount of ticks that are introduced to your landscape spaces?
So it's difficult to not have ticks on your property at all, especially living out here. It's virtually impossible because the ticks are really carried by every form of animal, as you mentioned, and even our own animals are, our dogs and our cats and everything. It's interesting though, because I started studying a little bit more about ticks, and interestingly, there are 4 stages to a tick. There's the egg, which is is born into the larva, and in each one of its stages, it requires a host. So as that infant becomes a larva, it has to attach to something. When it's ready to become a nymph, it has to unattach once it's gorged. It has to unattach and find a new host. Then that becomes engorged nymph, and it goes on to its next life, which is adult life. Again, for it to become an adult, it has to find a new host. So it's a very long cycle with ticks.
Wow.
Now, some of it can be broken by, I mean, there are lots of people that do organic spraying to prevent some of it.
Do you do any organic spraying on your plants?
We don't do any tick spraying. We don't get involved in really any preventative spraying.
So ticks, I know they don't climb up trees, but they do find their way into the grass.
Well, and the reason they do is because in order for them to attach to a host, they have to be able to jump off of something onto that host. So typically they'll climb to the tip of a blade of grass, and when you walk by, it'll jump onto you. And that's part of its cycle of being able to live on, because it has to find new hosts in all 4 stages. So yes, tick spraying, I think, most people out here do some form of preventative tick spraying, so that can help. There are certain plants that can also help, and the one that I mentioned earlier, which is called calicarpa, is known for really keeping ticks at bay around it. So it's a good plant to incorporate into your landscape. So there are a few plants
and
like
lavender.
that. And lavender, yeah. So, but
any
lavender.
herbaceous plants.
Right, but I don't know, the ticks aren't going to go onto the herbaceous plants.
Right, but the deer won't come.
The deer won't come,
Right.
exactly.
The deer bring the...
Exactly. I mean, a great, one of the most important things you can do, and it becomes a little challenging because you've got to get, the town to approve it, is to put up a deer fence. And, you want to keep the deer out. And every township is different in terms of how they allow for you to fence your property. In East Hampton, you can fence 50% of your property.
Oh,
that's the limit. And so in Southampton, it's a little different. They don't like 7.5-foot fences. They'll allow 6-foot fences, and they'll let you do 100%. So
but
every
deer
township's a little...
can jump higher than 6 feet.
Well, they can jump higher than 6 feet, but typically they're not going to jump into a property over 6 feet.
Right.
If they're stuck in a property and they need to get out, oh yeah, they'll jump 6 feet plus.
Yeah.
But typically a 6-foot
They won't go in.
protection, they're really not going to, and especially if you plant in front of it, which you're going to, because the deer won't go anywhere. They have very, very poor depth perception, so they won't jump into an environment that they can't see where they're going, or they can't perceive the distance of where they need to jump.
So I am, just a refresher to my viewers, I am sitting in the most idyllic garden of my friend Roxine Brown here in East Hampton, and she has a landscape company called Harmonia Inc. So check it out. It's at Harmonia Inc. Also, the website is www.harmoniainc.com, and you can see an array of her beautiful projects that she's worked on over the years in the Hamptons. And here we are in her garden, which has a hint of sort of the Japanese style to it, with her koi pond and her Japanese maple trees. And there's a wonderful meditative feeling to it all, amidst the pines and nature all around us, but the sounds of the pond and the birds, and it really is special here. And you are an expert on creating meditative spaces. Meditation is a big part of wellness. We talk about it all the time in Purist, and finding quiet places to meditate. Nature has a host of its own sounds that can be very soothing and really add to that experience of meditation. So, Roxine, will you tell us a little bit about what you look to create and what you look to incorporate into sort of a natural environment in your living room, your outdoor living rooms, as you refer to them, and meditative spaces?
So it's for me, when I create a landscape, the first thing that I do is I look at, how do I want to use the space? How do I want to create some private zones, some special places where you can go and either entertain or maybe just wander off and be by yourself and enjoy some space with a book or just being in meditation. So that I think is really important, is taking a property and really being able to sort of look at how can you create these private zones, these special little spots where you can just go to and feel like you're one with Earth. I think sound is really important to me as well. So it's wonderful to be able to incorporate water into a landscape. For us, we built this pond. We had a smaller pond, we built a bigger pond, and finally we said, let's go for it. We built a pond right off of our deck. So, you know, to be able to just sit by this and listen to it, and our bedroom window, and that's the other thing, is thinking about the adjacencies to the interior. Our bedroom window is just beyond that big tree, and at night when that window is open, we can hear the sound of the pond, which is just heavenly. So, and I think I love landscape that looks natural. I am not a structured landscape designer. I love things that feel like you could just sit down in the middle of it and feel as if you were sitting in nature. That's my style, and that's really, when you come to Harmonia, that's really the sort of the raison d'etre, is to have that very natural feeling. And I like plants that feel like they are arching, and they're not necessarily just erect and upright, which is again part of that sort of very natural feeling. I think it's important to implement many different surfaces and elements into your landscape. So stone is important to be able, you know, you can see here we have a pond and we've got it built out of stone, and then we've just got the wood from, you know, from the earth that we've built that's near the water and the stone, and you've got all the elements working together.
And what about the specimens that you select? That's a big part of it.
The first thing I think in any landscape is, you know, once you've sort of said, how do we want to allocate the space of this property, and how are we going to create these special zones? Trees are the first thing you plan into your landscape. It's the most important piece of the green piece of planting, and because it's the bones of the garden. And so specimen trees for us is a very big deal. We're always looking at, you know, what area requires a good tree, whether it's a shade tree to sit under or a tree that partitions the front from the back of your property, as we did with the Sleeping Beach.
Karen Anouk is asking, are there different energies from different types of plants?
That's a great question.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, Anuka, I can't tell you that I have the answer for you, but I have to believe there is, because I do believe that all plants have energies just as humans do. So I'm sure that they each have their own energies.
This comment, yeah. This is, well, if there ever was a beautiful example of your work, your personal garden is certainly that. And what's so lovely about Roxine and her company Harmonia Inc. and her landscape designs is that they all stem from a love of design in general and color. And you used to work in an assortment of fashion houses back in the day, right?
Yes,
when you lived in the city?
did, yeah.
So what made you transition from fashion to garden design?
So I grew up in a family of gardeners. My grandmother was a very, very serious gardener. She grew all of her own vegetables. She had beautiful rose gardens. She had gladiolas. She did bulbs. She did everything. We had a beautiful cherry tree in the middle of the backyard, which was not a big backyard. I grew up in California, and it was in the suburbs. So I would say that my first experience in life was working with her in the garden. And then my mother was also a very active gardener, and she loved to do bonsai. So I got a little different twist on, her take on gardening, and I would always help her with our home I lived with my grandmother when I was first growing up, and then my mother and my brother and I moved into our own home. And so we ended up with another property that I was able to get involved in gardening with my mother. And that was always my passion. So when we bought this home, because I lived in the city prior to this, so there was no gardening to be done. But when we bought this home, it had a start to the structure, but there was a lot to be done. And I just started working on it myself. And I was still working in the city, still in the fashion industry, designing. The inspiration for me in design is, it's really about texture, proportion, colors, how they play with one another. And it transcends through pretty much any design facet you can imagine when it comes to creative designing. So I always had a passion for this and decided one day, after many years in the fashion industry, that I was going to take the leap and I was going to let my passion become my new career. And that's what I did 18 years ago, and it's probably the biggest blessing I've ever had in my life.
Well, clearly you have a green thumb. So I'd love to know because I don't have a green thumb, but I know that if I give some attention and care to my plants, my indoor plants, or even my outdoor pots where I keep herbs, they thrive. What are some indoor plants that you love that you suggest are good fall into winter, or winter into spring plants that one can, cultivate an energetic relationship with? Because I think that's where, to answer Kieran's question, that's where the energies transfer. It's sort of, you're giving something to these plants, and they're giving back to you this beauty.
Yeah.
So what are some indoor plants that you love?
So indoor plants can be a bit more time consuming and finicky than I think outdoor plants. And maybe that's just because I feel more comfortable with outdoor plants, and that's what I spend my time with. But some of the indoor plants I like that are easy and I think give a lot of pleasure are philodendrons. There's many different varieties of philodendron. They're very easy plants. They don't require a lot of extra work. They don't get buggy, which is kind of one of the big problems with indoor plants over the winter time, as they start to get buggy, and then you're fighting to get rid of the bugs, and then the plant isn't happy, and the heat is on in the house, so the plant isn't happy because it's getting too dry. Philodendron's a super easy plant that takes very little care. There are also I have some bamboo palms that are in the corner inside our house. That has been a very easy plant to care for, and it stays indoors 12 months a year. It never comes out. So it's very happy inside as well. A more colorful plant that I had for many years, and I don't have it anymore, but I think it's very, very pretty, is a Christmas cactus. They bloom around Christmas time. They're vibrant, super energetic color to them, and they're also very easy. But they only bloom once a year, and it's a fun plant. Of course, there's amaryllis that are wonderful to do in the holiday season, and to start them early because they take 6 weeks before they'll really pop up, 6 to 8 weeks. So get yourself a nice sized bulb, get a lovely pot, put it in a special place, and just let it sort of thrive until plant it out for when you really want that to flower, and but give it a good 6 to 8 weeks to be able to go into bloom.
So when you're talking about, okay, so I know you're doing these beautiful landscape projects outside. Do any of your clients ever ask you to create sort of an indoor experience?
I have been asked that, yes. I haven't gotten that involved in it, quite honestly. I would love to. I did it in our own home. It was one of the most rewarding times and rewarding accomplishments that I've done. But the time is very challenging to be able to put into sourcing the indoor and the outdoor. And we are truly so busy in season in the
Yeah.
outdoor that it's really challenging to fit anything
I've noticed
more.
a lot of those plant walls,
Yes,
especially because I live in New York City,
Yeah.
and these green walls are sort
Yeah.
of everywhere now, in these lobbies
Yes.
and these nooks and crannies where there might be a little bit of,
Yeah.
daylight peeking in,
Yeah.
and I sort of have seen this trend towards that,
Yeah.
because when you're living in this urban center, concrete jungle, you want to bring in a little bit of nature.
Right.
So I've noticed
Right.
that level of attention to nature has increased.
And solariums as well. I mean, we've done a few solariums.
Mm-hmm.
We've done actually solariums off of exercise rooms,
Oh, that's so
which
nice.
is really nice because of just the air purification of the plant material. And so that we've done a few of.
What a nice way to decorate a home, though.
Yes.
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 Not always using furniture, but
Using plants as
Right,
and a room, a special space in a room to utilize for that.
So in your own garden, where do you like to meditate?
Okay, so I like to meditate. We have a very special
Wanna
garden.
show us?
Yeah, over here. We actually just completed putting a swing in. So the swing,
It's like a hammock.
well, this is our hammock.
Oh, I see.
This is our hammock, which, of course,
Pretty.
this is a wonderful place to just be to oneself and meditate. Take a book, read a book. And the pool is over beyond the bamboo grove. So it's nice because it's separate. It's all the way up the hill beyond the bamboo grove. So when you're here, you still have some really nice privacy. Even if everybody else is up at the pool, you can kind of get away and find your own little space. But over here, we just put in this swing we just built for our 2 grandchildren.
Oh, look at that.
So that's just
It's like a
gone in.
sculpture.
Yeah. But
Great.
this garden over here
Look
is
at
really...
these 2 trees here.
These are about 100-year-old white pines.
Wow.
Yeah. The space here, when we bought our home, it required a lot of work. But we really didn't care because the property itself was just so special.
Yeah.
It just had such a special feeling to it. We knew that. So we said, we'll do our diligence on the house, but we want this property. So
Does Charles get involved in some of your designs?
yeah, he does.
He does?
Don't you?
Sometimes.
So Roxine and Charles run Harmonia together. So as a husband and wife
Come
team,
join.
which I find very special. And not easy, I would imagine.
Not
There
easy.
he is.
No.
Not easy. It's had its moments.
So here's
but
the
it's all
couple,
good.
and then here's the
So I want
couple.
you to
the trees.
talk about
So
the
pretty.
Bhutan flags. Because
Oh,
the
the
flags
Bhutan
over
flags, yeah, let's
here
go over there.
are what really made this. This is again a meditative space. Beautiful big stone that you can sit on and just practice your meditation. Do your forest bathing as the Japanese would here. But talk about the Bhutan
So
flags.
about 4 or 5 years
Let's get a little
ago,
closer because they're hard to see.
Yeah.
There's so much
We-
greenery here.
we traveled throughout Southeast Asia for about 5 weeks, and Bhutan was one of the magical places on our list of travels. And in Bhutan, you see flags everywhere. And the flags, for the greater percentage, symbolize gravestones of those who have passed. But the flags, like what we're looking at here, which we literally brought
Faded out, but
scriptures on them.
Oh, look at that.
yeah.
These flags have the energy that is spread throughout Bhutan. And I am not from the spiritual world, as my wife is from the spiritual world, but I have to say that Bhutan changed my life then and forever, because you cannot resist the magic of the incredible energy and this is just a small piece of it. And when the wind blows, the energy flows.
Yeah, and it's really meant to be flowing to everyone around you. So hence the neighbors, you know, anyone nearby. And each color represents a different element. So, you know, it balances the energy of the environment, and it really sends all those wonderful good feelings and good spirits to everyone around. And that's really
How harmonious of you.
so
And they say Bhutan is the happiest country on earth, and in fact, it is.
Is it? Oh,
is.
now I have
Yeah.
to go.
yeah.
Well, Roxine and Charles, thank you so much for sharing
Thank
your
you.
beautiful
Thank you,
garden with
Christina.
us. I feel so much more serene since when I arrived, and really just so many compliments from everyone about your talents and your space, and we really appreciate you inspiring us to get on our fall gardening skills. And hopefully some people will reach out to you for questions.
Absolutely.
And how would they get in touch with you?
So they can go to our website, and there's a link directly to me.
Or to send you a message there?
I will.
Okay, good. So, so it's at Harmonia Inc. is the Instagram handle for those asking. And let's see if I covered everybody's questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in this sort of beautiful, magical, inspired backyard of my friends Roxine and Charles from Harmonia Inc. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening. And thank you for sharing all of your beautiful inspiration. Both
Thank
of you.
you.
When the wind blows, the energy flows. I love that. Thank you both.
All right. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Thanks for joining.